The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after noon, and Clara Vaughn had been watching it grow for the better part of an hour, her heart climbing higher into her throat with each passing minute as she stood on the wooden platform of the Julesburg station in northeastern Colorado territory, clutching a worn carpetbag that contained everything she owned in this world. She had been standing there since dawn, watching each train arrive and depart, scrutinizing every face that emerged from the passenger cars, waiting for one particular man who might not even remember promising to meet her here. The September sun beat down mercilessly, turning the simple brown traveling dress she wore into an oven, and her legs ached from standing so long. But Clara refused to sit, refused to look away from the tracks even for a moment, terrified that if she did, she might miss him. The station master, a portly man named George Henderson, had offered her a chair 3 times already, each time eyeing her with increasing concern and what might have been pity. "Miss, you sure someone is coming for you?" he asked again, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "It's near about 1 o'clock now, and you have been here since the first light." "I am certain," Clara said, though her voice wavered slightly. "He will be here." She did not tell George Henderson that she had left everything behind in Missouri to come here, that her family had disowned her for even considering traveling alone to meet a man she had only known for 3 weeks before he left to return to his ranch. She did not tell him that Robert O'Brien was the first person who had ever made her feel like she might be more than just a burden or a commodity to be married off to the highest bidder. She especially did not tell him that if Robert failed to appear, she had nowhere else to go and exactly $4.30 to her name. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention away from the tracks. A rider was approaching fast, his horse lathered with sweat, kicking up that dust cloud she had been watching. As he drew closer, Clara's breath caught in her chest. Even from a distance, she recognized the way he sat his horse, the broad set of his shoulders, the tilt of his hat. Robert O'Brien rode like he was part of the animal beneath him, moving with a fluid grace that made it look effortless. He pulled his horse to a stop in front of the station, swinging down from the saddle before the animal had fully halted. His blue eyes found hers immediately, and for a moment, neither of them moved. He looked different than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply forgotten the details in the 3 months since she had last seen him. His face was more weathered, tanned dark by the sun, with lines around his eyes from squinting against the glare. His brown hair needed cutting, curling slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his hat. He wore dusty work clothes, canvas pants and a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, and there was a smear of what looked like axle grease on his jaw. "Clara," he breathed, and then he was moving, taking the steps 2 at a time until he stood before her on the platform. Up close, she could see that his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, and there was a cut on his cheek that looked recent. "God, Clara, I am so sorry. The wagon broke an axle 15 miles out, and I had to ride here on horseback. I was afraid you would think I was not coming, that you would get back on the train and go home." "I knew you would come," Clara said, though her eyes were filling with tears now that he was actually here, the relief so overwhelming it threatened to buckle her knees. "I knew you would not leave me waiting if you could help it." Robert reached out slowly as if afraid she might vanish like a mirage and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "You have been waiting here all day, have you not? In this heat?" "Since the morning train," she admitted. "I did not know which one you would be meeting." Something that looked like pain flickered across his face. "I told you in my letter that I would be here for the afternoon train. Did you not receive it?" Clara shook her head. "I left before it could reach me. I could not risk my father changing his mind about letting me go, or worse, locking me in my room until I came to my senses. I left in the middle of the night and caught the first train west I could find. Robert's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she had not realized had fallen. You have been traveling for days then. Clara, you must be exhausted. I am here, she said simply. That is all that matters. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and Clara saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. The same disbelief that this was actually happening, that they had both taken this leap of faith and somehow landed in the same place. Then Robert smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and Clara felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. You are here, he agreed. You are really here. I have been half convinced for 3 months that I dreamed you, that no woman like you could actually exist, let alone agree to come all this way for a broken-down rancher who has more debts than cattle. You are not broken down, Clara said firmly. And I did not come for your ranch or your cattle or anything else. I came for you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw, and Clara watched Robert swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then, very carefully, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, as if he was still afraid she might disappear, and it tasted like dust and hope and the beginning of something that might save them both. When they broke apart, George Henderson was watching them with an expression of such obvious relief that Clara had to suppress a laugh. Well, I am glad that worked out, the station master said dryly. I was beginning to think I would have to take you home with me, miss, and my wife already says I am too soft-hearted for my own good. Thank you for your kindness, Clara said, meaning it. Not everyone would have been so patient. George waved away her gratitude. Just glad to see a love story work out for once. We get enough tragedy coming through here. It is nice to see something good. He tipped his hat to them both and retreated back into the station office, leaving them alone on the platform. Robert picked up her carpetbag, testing its weight. Is this everything? Everything I own, Clara confirmed. I travel light. We will get you more, Robert said immediately. Whatever you need. I am not a rich man, Clara. I will not lie to you about that. But I will make sure you have what you require. I require very little, Clara assured him. Just you. He looked at her then with such intensity that she felt stripped bare, like he could see straight through to her soul. I do not deserve you, he said quietly. But I am going to spend every day trying to. They walked to where his horse waited, a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a white star on its forehead. Robert introduced him as Rusty, and the horse snuffled at Clara's hand when she offered it, his whiskers tickling her palm. Can you ride? Robert asked. It is about 5 miles to the ranch, and I am afraid we will be riding double. The wagon will not be repaired until tomorrow at the earliest. I can ride, Clara said, though I confess it has been some time. Robert secured her bag to the saddle, then swung up onto Rusty's back with the ease of long practice. He held down his hand to her. Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up. Clara did as instructed, and with surprising strength, Robert hauled her up behind him, settling her side saddle on Rusty's broad rump. It was not the most dignified position, but Robert reached back and took her hand, bringing it around his waist. Hold on tight, he instructed. I will go slow, but I want to make sure you do not fall. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and rested her cheek against his back. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and smell the scent of him, a mixture of leather and sage and honest sweat. After 3 months of uncertainty, of lying awake at night wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life, this felt real in a way nothing else had since she boarded that train in Missouri. Robert guided Rusty away from the station at a walk, heading west toward where the land rose up in gentle swells, the prairie grass golden in the afternoon sun. Julesburg spread out behind them, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up around the railroad depot and the stage coach station, serving as a stopping point for people heading further west or north into Wyoming territory. It was smaller than Clara had expected, rough and utilitarian, but there was something honest about it that appealed to her. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as they rode, wanting to hear his voice to fill the silence with something other than her own nervous thoughts. "It is not much," Robert admitted. 200 acres, though only about half of it is good grazing land. The house is small, just 3 rooms, but it is solid. My father built it before I was born, back in '58 when he first came out here. He raised cattle, had dreams of building an empire." He paused, and Clara felt tension creep into his shoulders. "He died 5 years ago, kicked by a horse. After that, it was just me trying to keep things going." "No other family?" Clara asked gently. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her and my little sister too. It was just Pa and me after that." His voice was carefully neutral, but Clara could hear the old grief beneath it. "What about you? You said your father did not want you to leave." Clara was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "My father wanted me to marry Bernard Whitmore, a banker 20 years my senior who already buried 2 wives. He said it was my duty to make a good match, to think of my younger sisters. But Bernard looked at me like I was a horse he was considering purchasing, checking my teeth and my disposition. I could not stomach the thought of spending my life with him." "So you ran away," Robert said. "I chose myself," Clara corrected. "There is a difference. I am 19 years old, legally able to make my own decisions even if my father disagrees with them. He may disown me for it, but I will not regret it." Robert reached back with one hand and squeezed her knee gently, a gesture of support and understanding. "For what it is worth, I am glad you chose yourself, even if it makes me selfish for saying so." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the steady clip-clop of Rusty's hooves providing a soothing rhythm. The land here was different from Missouri, wider and wilder, with fewer trees and more sky. The horizon seemed to stretch on forever in every direction, and Clara found it both intimidating and exhilarating. This was a place where you could breathe, where you could become someone new if you had the courage to try. "How did you end up in Missouri anyway?" Clara asked. "You never told me the full story." "Cattle drive," Robert explained. "We had a good season last year, managed to gather enough head to make it worthwhile to drive them to market. I went along to make sure I got a fair price. After we sold them, I had a week before I needed to head back, so I stayed in town, treated myself to a real bed and some decent food." He glanced back at her, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "And then, I met a beautiful woman in a bookstore who was arguing with the clerk about whether women should be allowed to read philosophy." Clara laughed at the memory. "He was being insufferable, insisting that Plato was too complex for the female mind. I may have lost my temper." "You demolished him," Robert said with obvious admiration. "I have never seen anyone cite references quite so effectively as a weapon. The poor man looked like he had been trampled by a stampede by the time you were done with him. And you bought me tea afterwards and told me you thought educated women were attractive," Clara remembered. "I nearly fell out of my chair." "I spoke the truth," Robert said. "I always have with you, Clara. That has not changed." They crested a rise and Robert brought Rusty to a stop, pointing ahead. "There it is. Home." Clara looked in the direction he indicated and saw a small valley nestled between 2 low hills, with a creek winding through it, marked by a line of cottonwood trees. In the center sat a modest house, weathered wooden siding that had once been painted white but had faded to a soft gray. There was a barn nearby, looking sturdier than the house, and several corrals made of split-rail fence. She could see cattle dotting the hillsides, small brown and white shapes against the gold of the grass. "It is perfect," Clara breathed and meant it. This was nothing like the grand estate her father had envisioned for her, no mansion or townhouse with servants and calling cards. But it was honest and real, carved out of the wilderness by hard work and determination, and it called to something deep in her soul that she had not known existed until this moment. Robert made a sound that might have been relief. "You really think so?" "It is not much compared to what you could have had." "What I could have had was a gilded cage," Clara said firmly. "This is freedom. Do not ever apologize for that." They descended into the valley as the sun began its slow journey toward the western horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. As they drew closer to the house, Clara could see more details. The windows had real glass, which was a luxury out here, and there was a garden plot near the house, though it looked neglected, overrun with weeds. The barn was indeed in good repair, with a new roof that looked recently installed. Several chickens scratched in a coop near the house, and a dog emerged from under the porch, barking once before recognizing Robert and breaking into excited circles. "That is Bear," Robert said as he dismounted, then reached up to help Clara down. "He is useless as a guard dog but excellent at keeping me company." Bear proved to be a large mutt with shaggy brown fur and a tail that never stopped wagging. He sniffed Clara thoroughly, then decided she was acceptable and leaned against her legs with enough force that she nearly stumbled. Robert grabbed her elbow to steady her, laughing. "Bear, leave her alone. She just got here, you will scare her off." "I am not that easily scared," Clara said, scratching behind Bear's ears and earning an adoring look from the dog. "We are going to be great friends, I think." Robert led her toward the house, and Clara could feel her nerves returning. This was it, the moment where fantasy would meet reality, where she would see exactly what she had signed up for when she agreed to come west and marry a man she barely knew. He pushed open the door, which was not locked, and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, and it took Clara's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she found herself standing in a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. There was a stone fireplace on one wall, with a blackened kettle hanging from a hook. A rough wooden table with two chairs sat near the center of the room, and in one corner was an ancient-looking stove. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, and there were dishes piled in a wash basin, and boots scattered near the door, and papers stacked on every available surface. "I know it is a mess," Robert said, sounding embarrassed. "I have been doing everything myself since Pa died, and housekeeping has not been my strong suit. I tried to clean up before I left to meet you, but then the wagon broke and I had to rush, and I am afraid I did not do a very good job." Clara turned to face him, taking in his worried expression, the way he was twisting his hat in his hands. He looked like he expected her to turn around and demand he take her back to the train station immediately. Instead, she smiled. "It is nothing that cannot be fixed with some elbow grease," she said practically. "Do you have cleaning supplies?" "Some," Robert said. "Soap and a scrub brush, maybe a broom somewhere." "Then we shall make it shine," Clara declared. "But first, I would like to see the rest of the house, and then perhaps you could help me with some water so I can wash the travel dust off. I feel like I am coated in half the prairie." Relief washed over Robert's face so obviously that Clara felt a surge of affection for him. He was trying so hard, she realized, to make this work, to live up to whatever image he thought she had of him. It made her more determined than ever to prove that she had come here with realistic expectations, that she was not some delicate flower who would wilt at the first sign of hardship. He showed her the two other rooms, both accessible through doors off the main room. One was clearly his bedroom, with a large bed covered in a faded quilt and more clothes scattered around than Clara had ever seen in one place. The other was smaller, with a single window and a narrow bed that looked like it had not been used in years. This was going to be a guest room, Robert explained. Or maybe a child's room someday if we are blessed that way, but we have time to figure all that out. For now, I thought you might want to stay in here until we are properly married. I know we talked about it in our letters, but I want to make sure you are comfortable. I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest at his consideration. That is very kind of you, she said softly. Though I confess I am not entirely sure what the proper etiquette is for a situation like this. We are engaged, but we are also living alone together without a chaperone, which would give half the women in Missouri the vapors. We are not in Missouri anymore, Robert said with a slight grin. And out here, people tend to worry less about propriety and more about survival. But I meant what I said, Clara. I will not take advantage of your situation. We will do this properly. Properly, Clara repeated, testing the word. And what does that mean exactly? It means I will court you properly, even though we are living under the same roof. It means I will give you time to get to know me, to decide if this is really what you want. And it means that when we do get married, if we get married, it will be because you chose it freely, not because you felt trapped or obligated. Clara stepped closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Robert O'Brien, I traveled over 1,000 miles to be here. I left my entire life behind. I think it is safe to say I have already made my choice. Choices can change, Robert said quietly, especially when faced with the reality of what life out here is actually like. It is hard, Clara. Harder than you might imagine. The winters are brutal and the summers are not much better. We could lose everything to drought or disease or just bad luck. I need you to be sure. I am sure, Clara said firmly, but I appreciate your honesty and I will take you up on your offer of time. We both deserve that. Robert nodded, looking relieved again. All right then. Let me heat some water for you so you can wash up and then we can figure out supper. I have to warn you though, my cooking skills are limited to beans and bacon, and sometimes not even that turns out well. Clara laughed. Then it is a good thing I know how to cook. My mother made sure all her daughters could manage a household. It was about the only useful thing she taught us. They spent the rest of the afternoon settling Clara in. Robert hauled water from the creek and heated it on the stove so she could wash the travel grime away in the privacy of her small room. She changed into a fresh dress, a simple blue cotton that was one of only 3 she owned, and braided her long brown hair to keep it out of her face. When she emerged, feeling more human, she found that Robert had attempted to tidy the main room, though his efforts had mainly consisted of moving the piles of papers from one surface to another. "Let me," Clara said, and set to work properly organizing. She found that most of the papers were bills and receipts, records of cattle sales and equipment purchases, all jumbled together with no discernible system. It would take time to sort through properly, but she filed them away for now, clearing the table so they would have a place to eat. Robert watched her work with an expression that Clara could not quite read. "You do not have to do all this right away," he said. "You must be exhausted." "I am too restless to rest," Clara admitted. "If I stop moving, I will start thinking too much, and if I start thinking too much, I will start panicking about what I have done. Better to keep my hands busy." "What would you panic about?" Robert asked, coming to stand beside her at the table. Clara paused, considering how honest to be, then decided that if they were going to make this work, they needed to start as they meant to go on. "That I have made a terrible mistake. That you will wake up tomorrow and realize you do not actually want me here. That I am not strong enough or skilled enough or good enough for this life. That I am fooling myself thinking I can be happy with so little when I was raised with so much." She looked up at him, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I am terrified, Robert. But I am also more certain about this than I have ever been about anything in my life." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Robert said, "because I am feeling exactly the same way." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and Clara felt something shift between them, a deeper understanding taking root. This was not some fairy tale romance. They were two real people, flawed and frightened, trying to build something good out of hope and hard work. There would be no magical transformation, no easy answers, but maybe, just maybe, they could figure it out together. "Come on," Robert said finally. "Let me show you where I keep the food and you can teach me how to cook something other than beans." They worked together to prepare a simple meal of fried potatoes and eggs from the chickens, which Clara pronounced far superior to beans, even if Robert's technique with the cast iron skillet was somewhat suspect. They ate at the freshly cleared table as the sun set, painting the sky outside the windows in shades of purple and pink that Clara had never seen in Missouri. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said between bites. "What does a typical day look like?" Robert launched into an explanation of the daily routine, the endless cycle of feeding and checking on the cattle, mending fences, hauling water, cutting hay for winter feed. He talked about the difficulties of working alone, of trying to do the work of 3 men by himself, of the constant fear that one injury or illness would bring the whole operation crashing down. As he talked, Clara began to understand just how precarious his situation really was, how much courage it had taken for him to send those letters to her in Missouri, to dare to hope that she might actually come. "I can help," she said when he finished. "I do not know much about ranching, but I can learn, and I am stronger than I look." "I do not doubt that," Robert said with a smile. "Anyone brave enough to argue philosophy with a bookstore clerk and then run away from home to marry a stranger is clearly not lacking in strength." "But I did not bring you out here to work yourself to death, Clara. I want you to have a life, not just an existence." "And I will," Clara assured him. "But I also want to be useful. I want to contribute. We are partners in this, are we not?" "Partners," Robert repeated, trying the word out. "I like that. Yes, we are partners." After dinner, Robert insisted on cleaning up while Clara sat by the fire, too tired now to argue. She watched him move around the kitchen area, his movements economical and practiced despite his protestations about his domestic skills. Bear came and rested his head on her knee, looking up at her with soulful brown eyes, and she stroked his fur absently, feeling the events of the day finally catching up with her. "You should get some rest," Robert said, noticing her exhaustion. "Tomorrow will come early." "We can talk more in the morning." Clara nodded, suddenly too tired to even stand. Robert came over and offered his hand, pulling her gently to her feet. For a moment they stood very close and Clara thought he might kiss her again. Instead, he touched her cheek softly, his eyes full of something that looked like wonder. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for being worth the chance," Clara replied. She retreated to her small room, closing the door behind her. The narrow bed was surprisingly comfortable, the mattress stuffed with fresh straw that rustled when she lay down. Through the thin walls, she could hear Robert moving around, banking the fire, letting Bear out one last time. Then the house fell silent except for the usual creaks and settling noises of an old building. Clara lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling she could barely see in the darkness, wondering what tomorrow would bring. She thought about her family in Missouri, about her father's fury when he discovered she had gone, about her mother's tears and her sister's shock. She thought about Bernard Whitmore and the life she had escaped, the suffocating propriety and the endless rules about what a lady could and could not do. And she thought about Robert O'Brien, sleeping in the next room, this man who had offered her not wealth or security but honesty and freedom, and the chance to build something real. She had made the right choice. She knew that deep in her bones, even as fear nibbled at the edges of her certainty. She had made the right choice, and now she just had to be brave enough to see it through. Clara was awakened the next morning by the sound of a rooster crowing and gray light filtering through her window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory came flooding back. Colorado territory. The ranch. Robert. She sat up quickly, smoothing her hair back from her face, and heard the sounds of someone moving around in the main room. When she emerged, she found Robert already dressed, standing at the stove coaxing a fire to life. He looked up when he heard her door open and smiled, though she could see the signs of his own restless night in the shadows under his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "I hope the rooster did not wake you too early. That is Cornelius, and he has no concept of a reasonable hour." "Cornelius the rooster," Clara repeated, charmed despite herself. "Did you name all the animals?" "Most of them," Robert admitted. "It gets lonely out here. Talking to the animals helps." Clara moved to the window and looked out at the valley, now revealed in the soft light of morning. Mist rose from the creek, and the cattle were beginning to stir, their lowing carrying across the distance. Everything looked clean and new, washed by the night, full of possibility. "What can I do to help?" she asked, turning back to Robert. "You do not have to help," Robert said automatically, then caught himself. "Sorry, that is what I always say. I am not used to having someone offer. If you truly want to help, you could make breakfast while I go check on the stock. Just eggs and whatever else you can find. I am not picky." "I can manage that," Clara said. "How long will you be gone?" "An hour, maybe 2 at most. Just need to make sure none of the animals got themselves into trouble overnight." He hesitated, then added, "Will you be all right here alone?" "Robert, I am not made of glass," Clara said gently but firmly. "I will be fine. Go do what you need to do." He nodded and headed for the door, Bear following at his heels. Then he paused and turned back. "Clara, I am really glad you are here." "So am I," she said, and watched him disappear out the door, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. Alone in the house, Clara took stock of her new domain. The kitchen area was better equipped than she had first thought, with decent cookware and a well-stocked pantry that held flour, cornmeal, dried beans, and various other staples. There was even a jar of preserves that looked homemade, probably from before Robert's father died. She found eggs in a basket near the door, still warm from the chickens, and set about making breakfast properly. By the time Robert returned, she had scrambled eggs with wild onions she found growing near the creek, biscuits baking in the oven, and coffee boiling in the pot. The table was set with clean plates, and she had even managed to find a jar of butter in the cool box outside. Robert stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformation. "Is that fresh biscuits I smell?" "It is," Clara confirmed. "I hope you are hungry." They sat down to breakfast together, and Clara watched Robert eat with the enthusiasm of a man who had been surviving on his own, cooking for too long. She felt a surge of satisfaction at being able to provide this simple comfort, at already being useful in this new life she had chosen. "So what is the plan for today?" Clara asked after they had eaten and the dishes were cleared away. Robert leaned back in his chair, considering. I need to go into town to arrange for the wagon to be brought back once it is repaired. And we should probably see about getting you some supplies, things you will need now that you are living here. Clothes for working, perhaps some fabric if you sew, whatever you think you might want. Can we afford it? Clara asked practically. I do not want to spend money we do not have. Robert looked surprised and pleased by her question. We can afford the basics. I am not destitute, Clara, just not wealthy, but thank you for asking. I appreciate that you are thinking about such things. They made the trip into Julesburg in the wagon that Robert had arranged to borrow from a neighbor, a taciturn man named Sam who lived 5 miles to the north, and asked no questions about the young woman suddenly living with Robert. The ride gave Clara her first real look at the surrounding area in daylight, the rolling grasslands punctuated by rocky outcroppings, and the occasional stand of trees marking a water source. Julesburg was busier than it had been the day before, with wagons and riders coming and going, and people conducting business at the various establishments. Robert took her first to the general store, a large building packed floor to ceiling with every conceivable item. The proprietor, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up when they entered. Robert, good to see you. I heard you went to collect your bride. This must be her. This is Clara Vaughn, Robert said, his hand settling at the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and proprietary. Clara, this is Theodore Martin. He runs the best store between here and Denver. The only store between here and Denver, Theodore corrected with a smile. Welcome to Julesburg, Miss Vaughn. What can I help you with today? They spent the next hour selecting items, Clara trying to be practical and economical while Robert kept adding things to the pile that he thought she might need or want. She chose sturdy work dresses in dark colors that would not show dirt, several yards of muslin for undergarments, a new pair of boots that actually fit her feet, and various sundries. Robert insisted on adding a warm coat for winter, a good hat to keep the sun off, and a pair of leather gloves. You will need all of this, he said when she protested the expense. Winter comes early out here and it is fierce. I will not have you freezing because I was too cheap to buy you a proper coat. While Theodore was tallying their purchases, a woman entered the store, middle-aged with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked at Clara with sharp, assessing eyes, then turned to Robert. So the rumors are true. You have brought back a wife. Not quite yet, Robert said evenly. Clara, this is Margaret Foster. She runs the boarding house in town. Among other things, Margaret said, her gaze remained fixed on Clara. You are very young, and very far from home, I would wager. Missouri, Clara confirmed, refusing to be intimidated by the woman's scrutiny. And 19, which is hardly a child. 19, Margaret repeated. Old enough to know your own mind, I suppose. Though I hope you know what you are getting into, moving out to that ranch with no other women around for miles. It is a hard life, especially for someone who looks like she was raised in better circumstances. I appreciate your concern, Clara said, keeping her voice polite but firm. But I assure you I am quite capable of making my own decisions. Margaret studied her for another moment, then nodded as if coming to some conclusion. Well, if you are as tough as you sound, you might just make it. And if you need anything at all, you send word to me. We women need to look out for each other out here. The tension in Robert's shoulders eased slightly. That is kind of you, Margaret. Just being practical, Margaret said briskly. Can't have the poor girl suffering because you don't know the first thing about what a woman needs, Robert O'Brien. Lord knows your father was the same way, God rest his soul. She turned back to Clara. I will call on you next week if that suits. Bring some preserves and maybe some advice." "I would like that," Clara said, meaning it. The prospect of having another woman to talk to, even one as formidable as Margaret Foster, was appealing. After they finished at the general store, Robert took Clara to meet several other people in town, including the doctor, a young man named Peter Wallace who looked barely older than Clara herself, and the minister, Reverend Harding, a kindly older gentleman who insisted they set a date for the wedding immediately. "No sense in waiting," the Reverend said. "You are both of age, both willing, and from what I can see, both sensible people. How about 2 weeks from Sunday? That gives you time to get settled and for me to read the banns properly." Clara looked at Robert, who looked back at her, the question clear in his eyes. This was it, the moment where they made it official, where they set an actual date to bind their lives together permanently. 2 weeks from Sunday sounds perfect, Clara heard herself say, and watched relief and joy wash over Robert's face. They spent the rest of the day in town, Robert conducting various bits of business while Clara took in her new surroundings. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in those same incredible colors she had admired the night before. "Are you having second thoughts?" Robert asked as they drove, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "About what?" Clara asked. "About the wedding." "About all of this. It all happened very fast. You set a date to marry me, and we have known each other for less than a day as far as actually living together goes." Clara considered his words carefully. "I am frightened," she admitted, "but not having second thoughts. There is a difference." "What are you frightened of?" Robert asked gently. "Of failing," Clara said honestly. "Of not being what you need. Of disappointing you." Robert was quiet for a long moment, then he reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Clara Vaughn, you have crossed half a country to be here. You have walked into a life you knew almost nothing about with courage and grace. You have already exceeded any expectation I might have had. If anyone should be worried about disappointing someone, it is me." "Then we shall just have to make sure we do not disappoint each other," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "We shall have to work very hard at this marriage and at making each other happy." "I can live with that plan," Robert said, and they drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, their hands still linked. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural at the same time. Clara rose early each morning and prepared breakfast while Robert did the first round of chores. They would eat together, and then Clara would tackle the house while Robert worked with the cattle and the endless repairs that a ranch required. In the afternoons, she would often join him outside, learning to mend fences and treat minor animal ailments and a dozen other skills she had never dreamed she would need. Robert proved to be a patient teacher, explaining things carefully and never making her feel foolish for not knowing something. In turn, Clara brought order to the chaos of the house, organizing the paperwork and the stores, mending clothes that had been torn for months, and cooking meals that were actual meals rather than just fuel to keep working. They talked constantly, filling in the gaps in their knowledge of each other. Robert told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's dreams and disappointments, about the loneliness of the years after his mother and sister died. Clara talked about her life in Missouri, about feeling like she was suffocating under the weight of expectations, about her love of reading and learning, and her frustration at being told those things were not appropriate for a woman. "I wanted to attend university," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I wanted to study literature and philosophy and maybe even write, but my father said it was ridiculous, that I should focus on making a good match and raising children." "What is stopping you now?" Robert asked. Clara looked at him in surprise. "From what? Going to university? Robert, I am getting married in a week, And even if I were not, there is no university for hundreds of miles. But there are books, Robert pointed out, and you can still write. Just because you are out here does not mean you have to give up on what you wanted. We will figure out a way to get you books, and you can spend your evenings writing if you want. I will not stop you. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You mean that? Of course I mean it, Robert said, looking confused by her reaction. Clara, I did not bring you out here to clip your wings. I brought you here because I fell in love with a woman who was brilliant and passionate and unafraid to speak her mind. Why would I want you to be anything other than that? It was the first time either of them had used the word love, and it hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. Clara reached for his hand, finding it waiting for hers. I love you too, she said softly. I have since that first day in the bookstore, I think. I just did not know if I was allowed to say it. Robert turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. You are allowed to say anything to me, Clara, always. No secrets, no pretending, just us being honest with each other. Can you promise me that? I promise, Clara said. Can you promise me the same? I promise, Robert echoed, and then he kissed her, deeper and longer than he had before, and Clara felt heat bloom through her entire body. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. 2 more days, Robert said, his voice rough. I know we agreed to wait, but God, Clara, 2 more days feels like an eternity. Then we shall just have to be patient, Clara said, though her own body was protesting the waiting. We have the rest of our lives. Margaret Foster made good on her promise to visit, arriving one afternoon with a basket of preserves and a sharp eye for everything that Clara had done to the house. She walked through each room, nodding approvingly at the changes. You have done well, she said finally, settling at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Better than I expected, frankly. This place looks more like a home than it has in years. Thank you, Clara said, pleased by the praise, though there is still much to do. There is always more to do, Margaret said. That is the nature of ranch life, but you have made a good start. She studied Clara over her teacup. How are you really doing? And I want the truth, not just what you think I want to hear. Clara considered lying, giving the easy answer, but something in Margaret's expression made her opt for honesty instead. I am overwhelmed, she admitted, and exhausted, and occasionally terrified that I have made a horrible mistake, but I am also happier than I have ever been in my entire life. Is that strange? Not even a little bit, Margaret said. That is exactly how I felt when I came out here 30 years ago with my husband. We arrived with nothing but a wagon and a dream, and I cried myself to sleep for the first month. But then I realized that for the first time in my life, I was free to be myself, to work alongside my husband as a true partner, to build something that was ours. The West is hard on women, Clara. I will not lie to you about that. But it also offers opportunities that you would never have back east. You just have to be strong enough to seize them. I am trying to be strong enough, Clara said. You already are, Margaret said firmly. You just do not know it yet. Give yourself time. And remember, you are not alone out here. There may not be many of us, but we women stick together. If you need anything, you send word. The conversation shifted to more practical matters, with Margaret offering advice on everything from preserving food for the winter to treating common ailments with herbs. By the time she left, Clara felt better equipped to face the challenges ahead, and also less alone. The day before the wedding, Clara woke to find Robert already gone, a note left on the kitchen table saying he had business in town and would be back by evening. She spent the day preparing, washing her hair and pressing the one nice dress she owned, a green silk that she had brought from Missouri specifically for the wedding. It was impractical for ranch life, but she wanted to look beautiful for Robert, wanted him to see her as more than just a work partner. When he returned in the late afternoon, he was not alone. Sam, the neighbor who had loaned them the wagon, was with him, along with 3 other men Clara had not met before. They were carrying lumber and tools, and they set to work immediately on something near the barn, ignoring Clara's questions about what they were building. "You will see tomorrow," Robert said, looking mysteriously pleased with himself. "Just trust me." That night, they ate dinner with their guests, a rowdy affair full of laughter and terrible jokes and stories about Robert's youth that made Clara laugh until her sides ached. The men eventually left, and Robert and Clara were alone again in the quiet house. "Tomorrow," Robert said softly, standing close to her in the firelight. "Tomorrow you will be my wife. Tomorrow you will be my husband," Clara replied. "Are you ready for that?" "I have been ready since the moment I met you," Robert said. "Every day since has just been waiting to catch up to what I already knew in my heart." Clara reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble under her palm. "I am going to make you so happy," she promised. "I am going to be the best wife I can possibly be." "You already are," Robert said. "Just by being here, just by choosing this, you already are." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, and Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Tomorrow would bring challenges and changes, but tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, not a cloud in the sky. Clara dressed carefully in her green silk dress, grateful that she had thought to bring it. She braided her hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, and Margaret arrived early to help with the final touches, bringing wildflowers that she had gathered that morning. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, stepping back to admire her work. "Robert is a lucky man." "I am a lucky woman," Clara corrected. "He is everything I could have hoped for and more." They drove into Julesburg together, Robert having gone ahead with Sam to make preparations. When Clara arrived at the small church, she was surprised to find it fuller than she had expected. Word had spread about the wedding, and it seemed like half the town had turned out to witness it. Robert was waiting at the front of the church, wearing what was clearly a new suit, his hair freshly cut, and his face clean-shaven. When he saw Clara walking up the aisle toward him, his expression transformed into something that made her heart skip beats. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, Reverend Harding guiding them through the traditional vows with warmth and humor. When it came time for Robert to kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, mindful of their audience but still conveying everything he felt in that single gesture. After the ceremony, everyone moved outside to where Robert and his friends had been working the day before. They had built a simple platform and strung up lanterns, and someone had brought a fiddle. There was food that the townspeople had contributed, a potluck feast spread out on tables, and someone pressed glasses of whiskey into their hands for toasting. "To Robert and Clara," Sam called out, raising his glass. "May they have a long life, many children, and enough sense to come to their neighbors when they need help." Everyone laughed and drank, and then the fiddler struck up a tune, and Robert took Clara's hand and led her onto the platform. She had not danced in months, not since before she left Missouri, but her body remembered the steps, and Robert was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her through the movements with confidence. As they danced, Clara looked around at the assembled crowd, at these people who were essentially strangers but who had come out to celebrate their union anyway, and she felt a surge of affection for this rough, honest place and the people who inhabited it. This was her community now, her home. These were her people. The party continued until well after dark, and it was late when Robert and Clara finally made their way back to the ranch, both slightly drunk on whiskey and happiness. Robert drove the wagon carefully, and Clara leaned against his shoulder, watching the stars wheel overhead. When they arrived home, Robert pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to look at her. "Clara O'Brien," he said, testing out her new name. "How does that sound?" "Perfect," Clara said. "It sounds absolutely perfect." Robert helped her down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms, carrying her toward the house. Clara laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What are you doing, carrying my wife over the threshold?" Robert said. "It is tradition, is it not?" "I think that is for new houses," Clara said, but she was still laughing, delighted by his spontaneous gesture. He carried her inside and set her down gently in the middle of the main room, and then they were just standing there, looking at each other, and Clara felt nervousness flutter in her stomach. They had danced around this moment for 2 weeks, both waiting for it and dreading it in equal measure. "Clara," Robert said softly, "we do not have to rush anything. I know this is all new and I want you to be comfortable." "I am comfortable," Clara said, which was not entirely true, but she was also eager, curious, ready to take this final step into her new life. "I am your wife now, Robert. I want this. I want you." Robert's eyes darkened with desire, but he still moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. He took her hand and led her to his room, their room now, and helped her out of the green silk dress with careful hands. Clara returned the favor, helping him out of his new suit. And then they were both in their undergarments and Robert was kissing her again, deeper now, with more urgency. What followed was tender and awkward and ultimately wonderful. Two people learning each other's bodies and rhythms, figuring out together what brought pleasure and what did not. Robert was patient and considerate, checking in with her constantly to make sure she was all right, and Clara appreciated his care even as she wished he would let go a little more. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, the window open to let in the cool night air, and Clara felt a bone-deep contentment settle over her. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. "I love you," Robert murmured against her hair. "I do not think I can say it enough." "I love you too," Clara replied. "And you can say it as often as you like. I will never tire of hearing it." The next months passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. Clara threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life, determined to be a true partner to Robert. She learned to ride properly, graduating from Rusty to a smaller mare named Daisy that Robert bought for her from Sam. She learned to rope and brand, to treat sick animals and deliver calves when they came. Her hands, once soft from a life of leisure, became calloused and strong. Robert, in turn, seemed to bloom under her presence. He smiled more, laughed more easily, and the lines of worry around his eyes slowly began to fade. The ranch prospered as they worked it together, their combined efforts accomplishing more than Robert had managed alone. They purchased more cattle, expanded the grazing area, and even began to put aside a little money for the future. Winter came, as harsh as Robert had promised it would be. Snow fell for days at a time, turning the world into a white wilderness that was both beautiful and dangerous. They spent those long months mostly confined to the house, venturing out only to care for the animals and ensure they survived the cold. But Clara did not mind the forced proximity. She and Robert would sit by the fire in the evenings, reading aloud to each other from the books that Margaret brought on her increasingly frequent visits, or just talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. It was during one of those long winter nights that Clara realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Robert over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice strange. "As certain as I can be without consulting the doctor," Clara said. "Are you pleased?" Robert's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on him. Pleased, Clara, I am overjoyed. We are going to have a baby. We are going to be parents." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and Clara felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. A baby. They were going to have a baby. This wild, improbable life they had built together was about to become even fuller, even richer. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Clara continued working as much as she could, though Robert became increasingly protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous. They argued about it frequently, Clara insisting she was pregnant, not ill, and Robert countering that he would not risk her or the baby for the sake of getting a fence mended. "You are being ridiculous," Clara said during one such argument, standing in the kitchen with her hands on her hips, her belly now noticeably rounded under her dress. "I am being careful," Robert shot back. "There is a difference." "I am not made of glass," Clara said, echoing the words she had spoken to him on her first day at the ranch. "I will not break." "But what if you do?" Robert asked, and there was real fear in his voice now. "Clara, I cannot lose you. I will not survive losing you. So please, please just let me take care of you. Let me protect you, even if you do not think you need it." Clara's anger drained away, replaced by understanding. This was not about controlling her or limiting her. This was about a man who had already lost so much, trying desperately to hold onto what he had. "All right," she said softly, crossing to him and taking his hands. "I will be more careful. I will not take unnecessary risks. But Robert, you have to understand that I need to feel useful. I need to contribute. So we have to find a balance." They did find a balance, with Clara taking on more of the household tasks and the lighter farm work while Robert handled the heavy labor. Margaret became a frequent visitor, checking on Clara's progress and offering advice from her own experience with childbirth. The doctor, Peter Wallace, rode out once a month to examine Clara and declared everything progressing normally. As summer arrived and Clara's belly grew larger, they began preparing the small room that had been Clara's when she first arrived for the baby. Robert built a cradle with his own hands, painstakingly sanding and finishing the wood until it was smooth enough that it would not catch on delicate baby skin. Clara sewed tiny clothes from soft flannel, marveling at how small the garments were, unable to quite believe that soon there would be an actual person small enough to wear them. The baby came in late July, arriving during a thunderstorm that shook the house and sent Bear cowering under the porch. Margaret had come to stay the week before, sensing that the time was near, and she proved invaluable during the long hours of labor that left Clara exhausted and screaming. "You are doing wonderfully," Margaret kept saying, her voice calm and steady even as Clara was certain she was dying. "Just a bit more, just a bit more." Robert paced in the main room, prevented from being present by Margaret's firm insistence that birth was women's work and he would only get in the way. He could hear Clara's cries through the closed door, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. This was his fault, he thought wildly. He had done this to her, put her through this agony. Then suddenly there was a different sound. A high, thin wail that could only be one thing. Robert stood frozen, afraid to hope, until the door opened and Margaret appeared, looking tired but triumphant. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy with good lungs and all his fingers and toes, and your wife is asking for you." Robert practically ran into the room. Clara was propped up in bed, looking pale and exhausted but more beautiful than he had ever seen her. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket, was a tiny red-faced creature with a shock of dark hair. "Come meet your son," Clara said softly, her voice hoarse from screaming but filled with joy. Robert approached slowly, reverently, as if afraid the scene might shatter if he moved too quickly. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby, at his son, and felt his heart expand in his chest until he thought it might burst. "He is perfect," Robert whispered. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Clara said. "Or at least I think he does. It is hard to tell yet." The baby squirmed and made a small sound, and Robert reached out tentatively, letting the tiny hand grasp his finger. The grip was surprisingly strong, and Robert felt tears running down his face. "Thank you," he said to Clara. "Thank you for him, for you, for all of this. Thank you for waiting for me at that station, for taking a chance on this life. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for being worth waiting for," Clara replied, and they sat there together, the three of them, as the storm raged outside and the future unfolded before them. They named the baby James, after Robert's father, with the intention of calling him Jamie to distinguish him from his grandfather. Jamie proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping more than he cried, and Clara recovered quickly from the birth. Within weeks, she was back to her normal routine, though now with a baby strapped to her back or front in a sling that Margaret had shown her how to make. Watching Clara adapt to motherhood filled Robert with an awe that never quite faded. She was endlessly patient with Jamie, nursing him and changing him, and singing to him in a soft, sweet voice that Robert had not known she possessed. But she also remained herself, still fierce and intelligent, still reading philosophy in the evenings and debating points with Robert while Jamie nursed. As Jamie grew, the ranch continued to prosper. They had their best cattle sale yet that fall, finally putting them firmly in the black after years of barely scraping by. Robert used some of the profits to make improvements to the house, adding a proper bathing room and expanding the kitchen. The rest he saved, determined to build a secure future for his family. Winter came again, and then spring, and Jamie took his first steps in the muddy yard, falling down and getting back up with the determination that both his parents recognized in themselves. By the time he was 2, he was talking in full sentences, asking endless questions about everything he saw, and following Robert around like a tiny shadow, wanting to help with every task. "He is going to be a rancher," Robert said proudly one evening, watching Jamie attempt to feed the chickens, scattering grain everywhere except where it was supposed to go. "He is going to be whatever he wants to be," Clara corrected gently. "But yes, I think he loves this life." When Jamie was 3, Clara realized she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear, both of them having been through it before, but no less excitement. The second baby, a girl they named Rose, arrived in early summer, and suddenly the little house felt full to bursting with life and noise and love. Rose was different from Jamie, more demanding and less patient, but with a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Robert, who had been secretly hoping for a daughter, was utterly besotted, carrying her everywhere and letting her get away with behaviors that Jamie never would have been allowed. "You are spoiling her," Clara pointed out, though she was smiling as she said it. "She is my princess," Robert said, bouncing Rose on his knee while she giggled. "I am allowed to spoil her." The years passed quickly after that, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They added more land to the ranch, purchasing the adjoining property when the owner decided to move back east. Jamie started school in Julesburg, riding into town each day on his pony with a lunch Clara packed and stern instructions from Robert to behave himself. Rose proved to be a wild child, more interested in climbing trees and chasing cattle than in any of the domestic tasks Clara tried to teach her. "She reminds me of you," Robert said one day, watching Rose attempt to rope a particularly stubborn calf. "I was never that wild," Clara protested, then caught Robert's expression and laughed. "All right, perhaps I was, but I had to hide it better. When Jamie was 10 and Rose was 7, Clara found herself pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. She was 30 now and had assumed that her family was complete. But the baby, another boy they named Thomas, arrived healthy and happy, with his mother's dark hair and his father's easy smile. Robert was 42 now, with gray threading through his hair and permanent creases around his eyes from squinting into the sun. But he moved with the same easy grace Clara remembered from the first time she saw him. And when he looked at her, she still saw the same love that had brought them together all those years ago at the train station. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Robert surprised Clara by arranging for Margaret to watch the children and taking her back into Julesburg for a proper dinner and a night at the boarding house. "I cannot remember the last time we spent a night away from the children," Clara said as they sat at the table in the boarding house dining room, dressed in their best clothes. "It has been too long," Robert agreed. "I wanted to remind you that you are not just a mother and a ranch wife. You are Clara, the woman who changed my life the day she appeared at the train station." "I was so frightened that day," Clara confessed. "Standing there waiting, not knowing if you would come, not knowing what I would do if you did not. I kept telling myself I had made a terrible mistake." "And now?" Robert asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Now I know I made the best decision of my life," Clara said simply. "Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of uncertainty has been worth it because I got to face it with you. You are the best man I know, Robert O'Brien, and I would choose you again every single day." Robert brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I do not deserve you," he said, not for the first time. "You absolutely do," Clara said firmly. "And I deserve you. We deserve each other. We deserve this life we have built." That night, in the privacy of the boarding house room, they made love with the unhurried tenderness of people who knew each other's bodies intimately, who had learned over years what brought pleasure and what brought closeness. Afterward, lying tangled together in the unfamiliar bed, Robert traced patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your old life, the life you could have had?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "That life would have killed me, Robert. Maybe not literally, though possibly even that, trapped in a loveless marriage with no purpose beyond producing heirs. But it would have killed everything that made me who I am. Here I am alive. I am free. I am loved. How could I regret that?" "I just want you to be happy," Robert said. "I am happy," Clara assured him. "More happy than I ever dreamed possible." The children grew. Jamie developed into a serious, hard-working young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, already talking about expanding the operation, about breeding better stock, about the future. Rose remained wild, but channeled her energy into becoming the best rider in the county, winning races at local fairs, and eventually teaching other children to ride. Thomas, the baby, proved to have a gift with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse or the most aggressive bull with just his presence and his gentle hands. When Jamie turned 18, Robert sat him down for a serious conversation about the future of the ranch. To his surprise and pleasure, Jamie had ideas, good ideas, about how to modernize their operation and increase their profits. Father and son began working even more closely together, planning for the day when Jamie would take over the running of the place. "He is a better rancher than I ever was," Robert confessed to Clara one night. "He learned from the best," Clara said loyally. "But yes, he has a gift for it. We raised him well." Rose, at 15, announced that she wanted to become a veterinarian, a profession that barely existed for women. Clara and Robert exchanged glances, then told her that if that was what she wanted, they would find a way to make it happen. They began saving money for her education, determined that she would have the opportunities that Clara had been denied. Thomas, at 11, was still young enough that his future remained unwritten, but he seemed content to work alongside his father and brother, learning the ranch work that had sustained their family for generations now. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Clara woke before dawn and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Robert. She walked out onto the porch, now expanded and screened in against the mosquitoes, and watched the sun rise over the valley that had become her home. 20 years. 2 decades since she had stood on that train platform, terrified and hopeful in equal measure, waiting for a man she barely knew to come claim her. 2 decades of hard work and harder winters, of children and cattle and a life so different from what she had been raised to expect that her younger self would scarcely recognize it. And yet, Clara thought, this was exactly what she had been waiting for her whole life without knowing it. This place, this man, these children, this life of purpose and partnership and love. She had found her home not in a place but in a person, in the cowboy who had ridden up to that station with grease on his face and apology in his eyes, who had offered her honesty instead of promises, partnership instead of pretty words. Arms came around her from behind, and Clara leaned back into Robert's embrace, fitting against him as perfectly now as she had that first time they danced at their wedding. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her hair. "The day we met," Clara said. "The day I waited for you at the station." "I have never stopped being grateful that you did," Robert said, "that you took that chance on me." "You took just as much of a chance on me," Clara pointed out. "You could have chosen any woman. Why me?" Robert was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because you were brave," he said finally, "and honest. And because when you looked at me, you saw me, not just a potential husband or a rancher or whatever else. You saw the person I was, and you decided I was worth knowing." "That has never changed, Clara. You have never stopped seeing me." "And you have never stopped seeing me," Clara replied. "That is why this works, Robert, because we see each other truly, flaws and all, and we choose each other anyway." The sun climbed higher, painting the valley in gold, and somewhere inside the house, they heard the sounds of children beginning to wake, starting another day. Clara and Robert stood together on the porch, watching their world come to life, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had together. Years continued to pass as they do, bringing changes both welcome and unwelcome. Margaret Foster passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and Clara wept at the funeral, mourning the loss of the woman who had become like a mother to her. Sam, their neighbor and friend, decided to sell his ranch and move to Denver to live with his daughter, and after much discussion, Clara and Robert purchased his land, further expanding their holdings. Jamie married at 22, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Emma who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Within a year, they had given Robert and Clara their first grandchild, a little girl named Clara for her grandmother, and Robert cried openly when he held her for the first time. "I never thought I would see this day," he confessed to Clara that night. "Grandchildren, our family growing like this. It seemed impossible when I was alone on this ranch, wondering if I would die here with no one to remember I existed." "You are remembered," Clara assured him, taking his hand. "You are loved. You are the foundation of all of this." Rose did indeed go to veterinary school, one of only a handful of women in the program, and returned home with her degree, and a fierce determination to prove that she was every bit as capable as her male counterparts. She set up a practice treating large animals, traveling throughout the region and earning a reputation for skill and dedication. She never married, declaring that she had no interest in subjugating herself to a husband when she had work she loved. And Clara supported her decision absolutely, recognizing in her daughter the same fierce independence that had driven her to that train station so many years before. Thomas, to everyone's surprise, discovered a talent for writing, filling journals with observations about ranch life and the changing West. When he was 17, he sent a piece to a Denver newspaper, and they published it. More publications followed, and eventually, Thomas moved to Denver to pursue journalism, though he came home frequently, never quite able to stay away from the land he loved. Robert and Clara entered their 50s together, their hair graying, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work, but their love for each other undimmed. If anything, it had deepened with time, becoming something richer and more complex than the early passion of their youth. They knew each other's rhythms perfectly now, could communicate with just a glance, could anticipate each other's needs before they were spoken. On a spring morning when Clara was 52 and Robert was 64, they rode out together to check on the cattle in the far pasture, something they had done countless times before. But this time, as they sat on a hill overlooking the land they had built their life on, Robert turned to Clara with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "Nothing bad," Robert assured her quickly. "I have just been thinking. Jamie is more than capable of running this place now. He has Emma to help him and the younger children when they visit. We have done what we set out to do, Clara. We have built something lasting." "What are you saying?" Clara asked, though she thought she might know. "I am saying that maybe it is time for us to step back a little. Not stop completely, I am not ready for that, but maybe take some time to do the things we always talked about but never had time for. You wanted to write, remember? And I always wanted to travel, to see some of this country beyond our little corner of Colorado." Clara looked out over the valley, at the home they had built from nothing, at the life they had created through sheer determination and love. The thought of leaving it, even temporarily, felt strange. But the thought of new adventures with Robert, of having time to pursue the dreams they had set aside in favor of survival and raising children, was equally compelling. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. "I thought maybe we could start by going to Denver, spending a month there. You could visit the libraries, and I could see what the city has become. Then maybe we could go further, see California and the ocean. We have time now, Clara. We have earned it." Clara reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together as they had done 1,000 times before. "All right," she said. "Let us have an adventure." They spent the next several weeks preparing, making sure Jamie and Emma were completely comfortable with taking over the day-to-day operations of the ranch. There were some arguments, with Jamie insisting that his father was not old enough to retire, and Robert countering that he was not retiring, just stepping back. Eventually, they reached an understanding, and one bright morning in May, Robert and Clara boarded a train in Julesburg heading west. Clara could not help but think of the last time she had been at this station, 33 years before, standing on the platform with her heart in her throat, waiting for a man who might not come. Now she was boarding the train with that same man, his hand solid and warm in hers, embarking on a new chapter of the life they had built together. Denver amazed them both with how much it had grown and changed. They stayed in a proper hotel, with running water and electricity, luxuries that still seemed slightly magical to people who had spent most of their lives hauling water and reading by lamplight. Clara spent her days in libraries and bookstores, finally having time to read and study to her heart's content. In the evenings, she and Robert would walk the city streets, marveling at the changes the modern world was bringing, discussing what it all meant. From Denver, They traveled to California, and Clara got her first sight of the ocean at the age of 52. She stood on the beach with her shoes off, her skirts hiked up, feeling the waves wash over her feet, and she laughed with pure joy. Robert wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they watched the sun set over the water, painting the sky in colors that rivaled anything they had seen in Colorado. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "For what?" Robert asked. "For showing me this. For giving me the time to see it. For choosing me all those years ago and never regretting it." "How could I regret it?" Robert said, echoing words from long ago. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara O'Brien. You always have been, from the moment I saw you waiting at that station." They returned home after 6 months of travel, both ready to be back on familiar ground but enriched by what they had seen. The ranch was thriving under Jamie's management, and little Clara was now a precocious 4-year-old who dragged her grandparents around the property, showing them all the things they had missed while they were gone. Life settled into a new rhythm, with Robert and Clara still involved in the ranch, but no longer bearing the full weight of its operation. They had time now for each other, for long conversations and quiet evenings, for the simple pleasure of being together without the constant pressure of work demanding their attention. On Clara's 60th birthday, the family threw a celebration at the ranch. All 3 of their children came home, bringing partners and grandchildren, and the house that had once seemed so small and empty was full to bursting with life and noise and love. Clara stood in the middle of it all and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she had stumbled into, for the family she had helped create, for the man who stood beside her through it all. Robert found her later, standing on the porch looking out at the stars, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling night air. "Happy birthday," he said softly. "It has been a good one," Clara agreed. "A good year, a good life." "The best life," Robert amended. "Though I admit, I am biased." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, just being together as they had done countless times before. Then Clara spoke, voicing something that had been on her mind lately. "You ever think about how it all could have gone so differently? If you had not come to Missouri for that cattle drive, if I had not been in that bookstore that day, if you had not sent those letters, if I had not gotten on that train." "All the time," Robert admitted. "The thought terrifies me, honestly. How easily we could have missed each other entirely, lived out our whole lives never knowing what we could have had." "But we did not miss each other," Clara said firmly. "We found each other, despite the odds, despite the distance, despite everything that could have gone wrong." "That has to mean something." "It means we were meant to be," Robert said simply. "I am not usually one for fate or destiny, but I cannot help but think that somehow, some way, we were meant to find each other." Clara leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence, and together they watched the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had watched over their first tentative steps toward each other decades before. Robert passed away in his sleep at the age of 76, his hand held in Clara's, his family surrounding him. He went peacefully, without pain or fear, and his last words were a whispered "I love you" to the woman who had defined his life. Clara mourned him deeply, feeling as if part of herself had been torn away. But she also knew that she had been blessed beyond measure to have had him for as long as she did, to have built a life and a family with him, to have been loved so completely and so well. She remained on the ranch, which was now fully Jamie's but would always be her home as well. She spent her final years writing, finally putting down on paper the story of her life, of the young woman who had stood on a train platform waiting for an uncertain future, and the cowboy who had ridden up to claim her. She wrote about love and courage, and the building of a life in the Wild West, about the hardships and the joys and everything in between. Clara O'Brien passed away peacefully at the age of 73, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, leaving behind a legacy of strength and love and determination. Her last conscious thought was of Robert, and as she drifted away, she could have sworn she saw him waiting for her, just as she had once waited for him, ready to embark on their next adventure together. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that had begun when a frightened young woman chose freedom and a lonely cowboy dared to hope. And if you stood very quietly on that same porch where Robert and Clara had spent so many evenings together, you could almost feel their presence still, a reminder that true love, once found, never really ends. Jamie and Emma raised their own children on the ranch, instilling in them the same values of hard work and honesty that Robert and Clara had lived by. The land prospered under their care, and they made sure that the story of their parents was never forgotten, telling it to each new generation so that they would understand the foundation upon which their family had been built. Rose eventually did marry, at 42, to a fellow veterinarian who respected her work and her independence. They had no children but were content with their lives of service to the animals and people of the region. Thomas became a celebrated journalist, eventually publishing a book about life in the early West that was based largely on his parents' experiences and became a bestseller. The ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, a testament to what Robert and Clara had built from nothing but hope and determination. And while the physical traces of their lives eventually faded, replaced by modern conveniences and new construction, the spirit of what they had created remained, passed down through generations as a reminder that love, when it is true and honest and brave, can build something that lasts forever. The story of the cowboy and the woman who waited for him at the station became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, always ending the same way. With Robert riding up to find Clara waiting, with that first kiss that promised everything to come, with the beginning of a love story that would span decades and change the course of countless lives. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after, Robert and Clara O'Brien are still together, still building their life, still loving each other with the same fierce devotion that brought them together on that dusty platform in Julesburg, Colorado territory, all those years ago. Because some loves are too big to be contained by a single lifetime, and some stories are meant to go on forever.